None of the silliness from his tone when talking to Narbrel was present. This was the voice of an experienced pro-adventurer. Everyone immediately readied their weapons in the direction Luckrut was looking. Where is it? There, right there. Luckrut pointed in response to Peter's question towards a part of the giant forest. It was shaded by trees, so it was difficult to see inside. There was no sign of anything there. Even so, no one doubted him. It would be pushing it to just rush in there. So unless it comes out of the woods, let us ignore it. Well, it's probably smart to follow our plan and have Enfire move back. While they were talking, the forest stirred. The monsters slowly came into view. There were 15 small creatures about as tall as children. Surrounding them were 6 large ones. The smaller ones were subhumans called goblins. They had flattened noses and 2 little fangs stuck up out of their mouths. These fangs seemed almost like big rips in their squashed faces. Their skin was light brown. Their messy, oily clumps of hair were black. It was hard to tell if their raggedy dark brown clothing was dyed or just dirty. They wore animal hides instead of armor. Each carried a wooden club in one hand and a small shield in the other. They were like a cross between a human and a monkey, with a vicious edge. The fewer, larger monsters stood between 7.5 and almost 10 feet tall. Their jaws jutted way forward, and their faces looked remarkably simple. Their arms bulged with muscles like large trees, and their hands nearly reached the ground, helped by their stooped backs. They carried clubs ripped straight off trees and wore untanned animal skins around their waists. A horrid stench wafted all the way to the adventurers. Their warty skin was darkish brown, and they had well-built chests and abdomens. They seemed quite strong, and overall, they looked like big, hairless chimpanzees with a warped twist. These monsters were of the subhuman race known as ogres. Almost all of them were carrying bags that looked to be made of rags. They must have been migrating some distance. The monsters looked over the party of adventurers and then began stepping onto the grass. They were still some distance away, but their hostile looks on their ugly faces could be read easily enough. There are quite a lot of them, huh? We're not going to be able to avoid a fight at this rate. Yeah, goblins and ogres tend to go on the attack when they see they outnumber their opponents. Or rather, they're too stupid to evaluate their opponent's strength on anything besides numbers. What a pain. Aints understood his situation, and things had definitely sunk in. He still cocked his head slightly at how different it felt from a game. The goblins and ogres all had individualized features, whether it be their height or the darkness of their skin. In other words, they were all identical. That made him feel like he was facing 21 unfamiliar monsters. Reality is no game, he lamented in a voice the others couldn't hear. He was seized by the feeling he used to get when hurtling into a new area without reading a strategy guide. He'd clash with monsters he'd never heard of. It reminded him of the things he'd realized during the Battle of Khan. So Momon, oh, what is it? We said we'd have you take half of them. How would you like to divide them up? Can we just split into our 2 teams and kill them as they come? That'll get complicated if they all bunch up on one team. Nabe, is it possible for you to take out all the goblins at once with an area of effect spell like Fireball? I can use Fireball. The spell I have with the most firepower is probably Lightning. So it's that kind of setup, Aints murmured in his head. Lightning pierces in a straight line, right? In that case, if we manage to get them all lined up, could you shoot through them from the side? We'd have to have someone preventing them from charging. Oh, I'll take care of that. But most importantly, Enfire is in the cart. Can everyone else protect him? Momon, I'd be all talk if I had trouble with a couple ogres. I'll show you how easy it is to butcher these guys. The Swords of Darkness members understood what Aints was saying, with a voice brimming with confidence, and were relieved that they could trust him. Got it. That said, we shouldn't be allowing the enemy to charge either. We'll back you up as much as we can. Do you need any support magic? Oh, we're fine. You should support your teammates. Okay, I'll do that. Everyone, if we engage here, we're close to the forest, so there's a chance they'll run away. Then let us do what we always do. We'll draw them out just like yanking a turtle's head out of its shell. Oh, that is a fine plan. So Momon is blocking the charge, but how should we deal with the ones who get by? Peter, I'll trap the ogres with the martial art fortress. Dine, deal with any goblins that slip through. Ninya, cast defensive magic on me. After that, pay attention to how Nabe is faring while you focus on attack magic, although it might not be necessary. Luckrut, pick off any goblins you can. If any ogres get by, get in their way. In that case, Ninya, prioritize cleaning up the goblins. Everyone took Peter's orders simply by exchanging firm nods. The battle plan was coming together quite smoothly. They were really on the same wavelength. Impressed, Aints couldn't help but sigh. He remembered his days in Yggdrasil. He and his guildmates had also been on the same wavelength when they went out grinding together. Decoy, pull, block, select targets, that kind of team play can only be done when all the members know one another's abilities inside out. Maybe Aints was biased, but he didn't think chemistry like that was so easy to create. He did catch a glimpse of it in the Swords of Darkness, even if they weren't as in sync as his old friends. Momon, do you need any backup from us besides magic? No, that one be necessary. We're fine as the two of us. You're really confident, huh? Aints could sense some worry in Peter's tone. Are you really going to be all right? If the block were easily broken, they were in danger of being wiped out one by one. He was uneasy about that. They weren't playing a game, lives would be taken. You'll understand once we get started. With that as his only response, Aints cut the conversation short. If your team is ready to go, we can start the fight. Luckrut drew his composite longbow. The creaking of the bowstring stopped. Then came the bing of it slicing through the air. The loosed arrow flew straight across the grass and landed about 10 yards from the goblins who were on the move. They had put their shields up and were slowly closing the distance, but in response to Luckrut's sudden attack, they jeered. They were laughing at him because he missed. Of course, they couldn't hit a target more than 140 yards away, either, but they had conveniently forgotten that. Then, the fact that they had been attacked and the overwhelming imbalance in numbers incited their inherent violence, so they all screamed and ran full speed, unthinking, toward Luckrut. The ogres also charged after a short delay. They had lost themselves in their thirst for blood. They had no formation and didn't even keep their shields up. There was nothing left inside their heads. Noticing this, Luckrut cracked a smile. Hech. The distance separating them was about 100 yards when he took his next shot. This one didn't miss, going through a goblin's head. It was the goblin farthest to the rear. Tottered a few more steps forward before crumpling to the ground dead. The distance was closing before Luckrut's eyes, but his hand knocking the next arrow showed no sign of nervousness. Even if they got right on top of him, he knew he had a friend nearby who would protect him. Reinforce armor, Ninja cast a defensive spell behind him. Luckrut loosed another arrow, another shot at 60 yards, another pierced head, another goblin tumbled to the ground. Then Peter and Dine started to move. The goblins were nimble, but the ogres took larger steps. There wasn't much of a pace gap between the two groups. That said, they were running over about 110 yards of grass, so the ogres with their more powerful legs were out front. The goblins followed. Each group was spread out to some extent. This made it difficult to capture very many of them in an area of effect spell, but that was fine. Dine's first job was to trap an ogre, Twine Plant. When he cast the spell, the grass under one ogre's feet began to flail like a whip. It twisted around them. Restrained by plants tough as chains, the ogre began to get frustrated. Its roar resounded across the plain. Into this scene, at a leisurely pace, walked Aints, followed by Narbarrel. No one, looking at his gait, would imagine he was headed into a fight against charging monsters. It looked more like he was taking a stroll through the meadow than navigating a combat zone. As the nearest ogre was getting closer, Aints crossed his hands over opposite shoulders to clutch the hilts of his swords. Narbarrel put her hands under his cape to pull the sheaths off. Then the blades slowly appeared in two great arcs. Every one of the Swords of Darkness gasped at the dazzling spectacle. The nearly 5-foot swords Aints gripped were so splendid they seemed like they might have more value as works of art than as weapons. The keen blades coldly gleamed. Their tips spread into fan shapes, and their grooves were engraved with a pattern resembling two intertwining snakes. They were weapons a hero would wield. Aints had one in each hand. Seeing him like that caused all the Swords of Darkness to gasp again. If the previous gasp had been in admiration, this time they were knocked completely speechless. Swords get heavier the longer they are, it was only natural. No matter what kind of spell was cast to lighten the load, swinging these around would have been no easy feat. After traveling with Aints for a short time, they understood he was exceptionally strong. But the common sense they amassed up, till then didn't allow for the sight of him holding a great sword in each hand so comfortably. but he swung them around into a fighting stance so easily they might have been twigs. He cut quite a majestic figure. Momonure incredible, Peter gasped, representing everyone's shock. As a warrior himself, he'd just been instantly taught what kind of strength was possible. It dawned on him how long he would have to train to achieve it. He had the vague notion that he and Aints were on different levels, but having conclusive proof before his eyes gave him shivers that started in his toes. Even goblins, with their lesser intelligence, seemed to realize they should be afraid. Their recklessly charging feet slowed, and they changed course to take a longer way around Peter and the others. Only the ogres continued to barrel toward Aints, too dim-witted to second-guess their strength. As the distance closed, they raised their weapons. No matter how long Aints' swords were, the ogres were still huge and had better range with their equally huge clubs. It looked like the ogres would get the first attack, but then Aints rushed at them. He was like a hurricane. Then in a very fast flash of silver, the sword in his right hand flew through the air. It seemed to cut space itself. The attack was magnificent. Even though they hadn't been cut, everyone watching felt death beside them. Every hair on their bodies stood on end. It was over in that single swing. Aints targeted a new ogre, leaving the one in front of him. As if waiting for him to move, the upper body of the first ogre slipped to the ground. The lower body remained standing. The spray of blood, the slop of innards, and the awful stench throughout the area showed this was neither a dream nor an illusion. He cut the monster in two with a single diagonal stroke. Although they were in the middle of a battle, both friends and foes froze to observe the riveting scene. Time seemed to stop. It was a deadly blow, one that would slice a monster as meaty as an ogre in half. Someone let out a woe. The battlefield had fallen so silent that everyone heard it. I can believe it. He must have a mithril plate, or maybe orichalcum. No, could he have an adamantite plate? To cut an opponent in two wasn't impossible. Someone who trained a very targeted set of skills, or who had a powerful magical weapon, could probably pull it off. But to hold a gigantic, two-handed great sword in one hand and give it enough momentum to cut someone in half would be difficult. That was common sense. A two-handed sword was used with two hands and relied on mass and centrifugal force. To cut it wasn't about slicing and dicing with physical strength. So the only way to explain what Aints had just done was to conclude that his sword was endowed with incomparable magic, that he had more strength in one arm than most warriors had in two, or both. The ogres that had stopped in their tracks, shocked by the scene in front of them, began to backpedal with fear written on their faces. Aints advanced one step to fill in the distance. What's the matter? Not going to attack? His quiet, casual voice floated over the battlefield. Even just that question scared the ogres, because they'd just seen how overwhelming the gap in strength was between Aints and them. Aints moved in on a second ogre so quickly, it was hard to believe he was wearing full plate armor. "You the ogre raised a hoarse voice. It could have been a shriek or a battle cry as it readied its club against Aints, but anyone would have recognized it was moving too slowly. As Aints closed in, the great sword in his left hand moved, as if he were going to lightly brush the ogre away. Its upper body went tumbling through the air. It landed somewhere completely different from its lower body. He cut the monster in two with a single horizontal slice. "Momon, are you a monster?" Witnessing another riveting scene, nobody had any objections to what Dine had said. Okay, and as for the rest, Aints stepped forward. The other ogres, with ugly faces frozen in fear, moved farther back. The goblins had taken a large detour to the side. They got around and attacked Peter and the others. The swords of darkness had lost themselves in amazement, but now had to spring into action. Peter readied his broadsword and large shield and ran to meet the 14+ goblins. The head of the one out in front went spinning off after a lunging swipe. Dodging the fountain of blood, Peter closed in on the rest of the goblins. "Eat this!" A goblin bared its yellowed teeth as its foul, throaty scream filled the air. Peter easily took a goblin club strike with his shield. The hit that came from the side got blocked and repelled with a loud crack, thanks to the magic reinforcing his armor. Magic arrow, two glowing shots of magic nailed the goblin trying to hit Peter from behind, and it collapsed like a marionette whose strings had been cut. Half of the goblins surrounding Peter ran at the remaining 3 swords of darkness. None of them went to attack Narbarrel, who was standing next to the gale force wind of death named Aints. Luckrat had tossed aside his composite longbow and whipped out a short sword. Both he and the mace-wielding Dine dashed into Ninja's line of fire to provide cover for him. The fight between Luckrut and Dine and 5 goblins was about evenly matched. If they paced themselves, they could probably beat them one by one, but it would take a while. Luckrut had taken a club to one arm and was tolerating the pain with an obvious grimace as he stabbed his short sword into a gap in a goblin's leather armor. Dine had taken a bit of a beating. Although his movements had become somewhat sluggish, it didn't seem like any of his wounds were too critical. Ninja, keeping a sharp eye on the situation, began to conserve magic. There was one ogre immobilized with a spell. If circumstances called for it, he would have to take it on. Meanwhile, Peter was spending equal time on offense and defense against 6 goblins. The 11 goblins' violence didn't overwhelm the adventurers, though. There was hesitation in their attacks. Their morale had dropped significantly after witnessing Aintz's amazing one-hit kills. They hadn't made up their minds yet if they should fight or flee. Then, as if to crush their morale further, one of Aintz's swords swung in a huge arc. No one could hear anything but the sound of it slicing through the air. Then something heavy fell to the ground. 2 things, in fact. As everyone expected, the number of ogre corpses had increased. Now only 2 ogres remained. One was trapped in the grass. The other was cowering before Aintz's. Aintz's helmet moved to confront the final ogre. Perhaps it felt the gaze of Aintz's eyes from deep within the thin slit of his helmet. It emitted a bizarre groan and attempted to escape. It dropped its club and raced back toward the forest faster than it had run over, but there was no way it would be allowed to get away. "Nabe, get him," his icy voice rang out. Narbarl, who had been standing by behind him, gave a quick nod. Lightning. A bolt of lightning sent large vibrations through the air. It shot through the fleeing ogre's body with a peal of thunder. Then it continued on through the ogre that was still tangled up behind him. That was all it took to stop the beating pulses of 2 ogres. "Let us get out of here. Run away, run away." The goblins, who had been watching these events unfold as if in a trance, called for a retreat and went to flee. But as might be expected, Peter and his crew moved faster. The demoralized goblins were not so tough anymore. They were taken care of one after another in smooth succession. Ninja figured he didn't need to conserve magic any longer and added his powers to the fray. The goblins were killed in the blink of an eye. Amid the reek of the dead bodies, Dine tended to Luckrut's and Peter's wounds with light healing. Ninja, with nothing to do, went around slicing the ears off the goblins with a dagger. By turning items like those into the guild, they would be compensated per monster. It wasn't always ears, of course. A specific part was required from each kind of monster. For subhumans like goblins and ogres, it was usually ears. As he was removing the ears with a practiced hand, he saw that Aints, accompanied by Narbarl, seemed to be searching the vicinity where the ogres had fallen. "Are you looking for something?" Aints looked up to respond to Ninja's question. "Yeah, just seeing if there are any drops, especially crystals." "Crystals? Have you never heard of ogres carrying precious stones so they don't huh? I was just thinking maybe on the off chance. Oh yeah, it would be great if ogres carried treasure around," said Ninja, adeptly clipping off ogre ears. "But wow, Momon, I knew you had confidence in your abilities, but I didn't realize how strong you really were." In response to Ninja's comments, the other 3 who were almost finished healing chimed in with more praise for Aints. "You were amazing. As a warrior, I hope I can be as awesome as you someday. How did you get so strong? With neighbor long and all, I figured you were rich, but where are those fantastic swords from?" "I don't think I've ever seen more expensive-looking swords. Now I see that what you were saying at the guild was for real. You might be as strong as the oft-rumored about strongest warrior in the kingdom. I am impressed." Nabe looked smug next to Aints, but he demurred. "Nah, it just happened to work out." Peter smiled wryly. "Just happened to work out? Really? The way you fought reminded me there's always someone stronger. I know you guys will get to the point where you can take care of small fries like that easily too." Everyone's smiles got wryer. Peter and his friends were working hard at getting stronger, and they didn't waste a cop of their rewards, only spending on things that would make them stronger. That's why they'd been able to work so well together so far. But even reflecting on how far they'd come, they didn't imagine they'd ever be able to reach Aintz's level. To the Swords of Darkness, Aintz's level was the furthest of extremes. Only a handful of people were allowed to access it. This guy they were traveling with would probably go on to be a hero whose name would be known by all.